Hi, Chris. Congratulations on the film, first of all.
Thank you. Thank you.
I really liked it. And I wanted to start at the very beginning. So, how did you first get the idea for this story?
I'd written a script which was too expensive as a first feature film, and I was walking in the Lake District with my partner around Christmas time, New Year, and just thinking about how this is such a beautiful landscape and unutilized in British film. And as we were talking about this shepherd walked up like over the top of the mountain through the mist, and I was like, oh, he looks pretty cool and like this sort of singular sort of kind of Western character. Um, and I was at the time I was taking lots of stories from the Bible and sort of messing with them and seeing if I could kind of and so he it was like the shepherd and then the parable of the good shepherd and what would happen if once you go up to find this lost soul, this lost sheep on the mountain, if somebody messes with the 99 saved souls in the bottom. And then at the time, there were this spate of incidents where gangs were cutting the hind legs off sheep around Cumbria and Derbyshire. So it was marrying those three things together, and then that was kind of the first sort of nucleus. That happened that was like one afternoon, and that was off to the races.
That's amazing. I did want to ask you how much is this story inspired by the real life farming communities in Ireland? And after you decided to talk about the subject matter, how much research did you go through?
Yeah, I mean, I was brought up in Cumbria, and so I was around. I worked on farms a bit when I was at school and when I left school, but I didn't do any of the sort of cool like working with animals. I was like picking potatoes and bagging up things and like carrying stuff. But it was around that sort of world, and I'm always very interested in the way that people work. What job when I'm creating characters to write stories about it, what they do as a living is very much an expression of who they are or who they aspire to be or and so I kind of had I'd been around that world, and then I did some research about and I knew some shepherds, and I went up and talked to people in Cumbria and Northumberland. And so I'd written the original draft set in Cumbria, and then when we had the opportunity to relocate to Ireland, we went. Jacob, one of the producers, and I went on a road trip down the west coast of Ireland and met maybe two or three shepherds and farmers every day for 10 days. And I told them the story, but and they responded to that. And I also wanted to make sure that the idea of shepherding was the same, which is upland shepherding in Cumbria and in Ireland is you put your animals on top of the mountain, and there are no walls, there's no fences. They're hefted, which means that the animals know which bit of land is theirs. So don't know to a blade of grass that they can go here, and then they walk back. And then the ewes teach the lambs, and it's cyclical. And then there's this idea of collective responsibility of like if you share land, you keep an eye out for the other shepherds' animals as well. So, and that was the same in Cumbria as it is in Ireland, and that was brought like about 1300 years ago by the Vikings, who brought a lot of the sheep that are in those areas and also the sort of farming, shepherding practices. So yeah, I did quite a bit of research, know a lot about sheep.
Yeah, I can tell. And it's very fascinating. I don't think it's something that we see on screen a lot. Is that something you wanted to portray, or what do you hope the audience gets from this film?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted to shine a light on um that kind of world. It feels, I feel like it should have a exoticism to an audience, even though it's quite close to us. We don't see, we see sheep as we drive past, or we go walking in the mountains. You go hiking and you see sheep, but you don't understand quite how involved and what a lot of work it is to have that sheep on that mountain. And it's a really beautiful old practice. And they're also caretakers of the land. You know, the reason why the Lake District looks like it does is because of these people that have their animals on the mountains, and they have such a responsibility for keeping it in the way that we like it, you know. So so that was definitely something that I wanted to shine a light on. Um, but then, you know, and then explore about what it means about the pressures on these people when they, you know, it's a hard way to earn a living. You know, most shepherds are clearing like 15 grand a year, or, you know, after they've, you know, and they work 365 days a year. You know, if you go on holiday, you know, you have to pay somebody to come and let, you know, it's like there's, it's such a, it's not, it's like what I do. It's not a job. It's who you are. And, and so, you know, I thought it was really important to sort of explore that and the pressures that are on them, and the pressures of living cheek by jowl to different to people that are also under similar sorts of pressures, and how those pressures can so can escalate into something else.
Yeah, and speaking of shining a light on this reality, I really like that there's a big part of the film that's in Gaelic. How did you, first of all, how did you decide to do that in the first place? But also, what relevance does it have to hear the language in the film for the characters?
So when we went on that little road trip I was talking about, every farmer that we met, bar one who was English, everybody spoke, and he spoke Irish, but everybody else was like that was their first language. So it felt really important, you know. It's like if it's always the authenticity and of why we're setting somewhere in a location is always is of like number one importance to me, because otherwise an audience will be able to smell that it's insincere, and you've lost people. And I love that, you know. I love immersing myself in a different culture or a different space. So it felt really important that these people were Irish speakers. um and then the idea that you know, there's English is in there too, and some of the characters don't understand the Irish. It was just because the film is about conflicts and about what it takes once you started a war. What does it take to finish the war? You know, it sort of it without making it a big part of the front story. It sort of alludes to this idea of the conflicts that Ireland has experienced, and this invasive culture and invasive language which has been eroding. Maybe not as much the culture, because the culture is so strong, but the language, about the way that English has done that across the world, but the way that it's done that in Ireland has kind of eroded. But it feels like Irish language, like Welsh too, is on a kind of on a upturn, and becoming very important to people's identity again, which is brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also shot on location. So I wanted to ask, how was that experience for you? But also, did it have any challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. It was, you know, it means that, you know, the farmhouses were farmhouses, and the mountains were mountains. So there was very little we could do. We didn't have very much money, so everybody had to dig in. And the challenge is, like, the week before on our tech recce, the mountain that we shoot all the sheep work on, it was so windy there. It's a place called Sally Gap, and that's Lugalaw Mountain. It's quite famous. It's in Wicklow, but it's quite close to the sea. And the wind was there's a lake at the bottom, and the waves on the lake, which is usually flat, were about 15-20 feet, because the wind was pushing so hard. And we were taken off the mountain because we couldn't no one could stand up. You couldn't hear. You stood next to people, you were talking, they couldn't hear you. It was so windy. So it could have been a lot worse than it was. We had very good weather, which wasn't great for the soundtrack, but we had this like constant, but it was just really cold. And we had 5 interior days, through the whole shoot. Everything else was outside. So it was just really cold. It was like 3 or 4 degrees every day. Um, but so even though it didn't rain and it wasn't windy, it just drains you of like you're just exhausted. By the end of the day, you've been stood up outside all day, just trying to keep warm, trying to move. You're carrying equipment up mountain. It's like it was physically exhausting. By the time of it, everybody was like completely done, cooked. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I think the acting performances are really impressive in this film. They really stood out to me. How did you work with them on that, especially like in such hard weather conditions?
I mean, it's just the best cast. Like everybody is brilliant. And that's, so my position is that I work really hard on the scripts and I work really hard on the character. And thankfully these guys are really interested in character. So I just talked to them about who they were and let them talk to me about who they, how they found the character. And we just talked about that in the run up to the film. We didn't have any rehearsals because we just didn't have enough money. It's hard to get people together. But Chris came and Barry came to do kind of small shepherding boot camps to like be able to like work with it. One of the things that can betray you is if you have any sort of nervousness around animals, then they can smell it, and so the dogs and the sheep will just not.
Yeah.
We just needed to make sure that they felt comfortable and they were both brilliantly comfortable and they learned how to maneuver the sheep safely and so that the sheep were so we had a shepherd that was teaching them, and Chris was obviously working on the language for quite a way on the run in, but it was just talking about the characters. And then what I like to do is interfere as little as possible. We block it, and then I let them go, because if I start interfering and putting ideas in their head, they're never going to show me the thing that they were going to show me, which is purely from them. And that's the thing that I get incredibly excited about, is like, what are they going to do? And if you talk to them and you get them in the right place so they understand who this character, or that they get this character, then they do like really beautiful things. And yeah, so it was like trying not to like fiddle was like my main sort of note to myself, and just support them and answer any questions, or help them and be their barometer, really.
Hmm. I think that worked beautifully.
Thank
I
you.
also know that you worked in the camera department before. Do you
Yeah.
think this had an influence in your directing style? And I also wanted to ask how you sort of did this transition into then writing and directing.
I think it definitely did maybe not affect my directing, but it certainly affected my writing style. So I don't write, like when I write screenplays, I don't write any sort of like, oh, close up or wide shot. I don't like put any but I use the language to sort of generate image structures. So what you're seeing, what you're reading on the page is what you'll see on the screen, if that makes sense. Um, so you're painting the image, and because as I think of the story, it plays out as a story. I see it in my mind, and that I think that came from being it was sort of like crystallized as being a camera operator and having the difference between looking at a monitor or a screen and seeing an image and having it beamed straight into your eye. It's like being the first person to see that image before it even gets to the monitor, and the director and everybody else can see it. It's a really special. It's really special. I always felt really privileged to do that when I was operating. But it also meant that changed the way that I thought about writing. I wanted to distill it in that way. Um, and so then and I was really lucky again. I was working with Nick Cook, who's a brilliant cinematographer, I talked to him a lot about the language of the film, which I didn't want people to see, but wanted people to feel. So we use like these blocks of like 3 blocks in. So we got Michael. It starts very composed, and then when he gets to the mark, when he realizes that something wrong, we track and dolly until he gets to the point where everything is has gone terribly wrong, and we go handheld, and then handheld means chaos for him. But in Jack, as we transition into Jack's story, then it stays handheld because he's young and he has a different relationship, and we mirror it back, so like then it tracks and dollies, and then when he's kind of really made a mess of it, it becomes very static and sort of traditional framings. And so I didn't want people to see that. I just wanted them to feel that. So I talked a lot with Nick about this and about the color and the framing, and so because I allow the actors to kind of own the space. We had a shot list, but it was always evolving to what they would do, and because Nick and I had become so we had this understanding of what the language was, he was just always in a really great place, and he'd be like, "What about this?" And I'd be like, "It's amazing." And so it was, yeah. So it was just front loading that kind of front. So you're not trying to solve. You have enough things to solve as a director.
Mhm.
Enough questions to answer. So as much as you can do beforehand to allow so that everybody knows what they're doing, and the easier it becomes, I think.
That's amazing. And I also want to say congratulations on the British Independent Film Awards.
Thank you.
Um, but thank you so much for your time. It's really interesting to hear the story about the film.
Thank you very much.